I see you all. Hello, come on in, come on in. Tonight is going to be incredible. We're excited to talk to you entrepreneurs. We're excited to talk to you women. We're excited to hear from Dr. Stephanie Barnes, who will be who's joining us this evening. A little bit about Dr. Barnes. She is a moonlight writer, a corporate attorney, awarding winning author on leadership, gender equality, and women's rights. She also hosts a talk show and podcast, Conversation from the C-Suite, the Girlfriend's Guide to Being a CEO. So I am excited. She's going to introduce herself a little bit more, but she's been featured in Harvard Business Review, Personal Excellence Magazine, the Huffington Post, so many accolades. Again, very professional leadership. She's done some strategic planning, organizational and performance excellence. So she actually received her law degree from Harvard Law School and her PhD in organization leadership from the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. So I'm excited to have you and welcome you here tonight, Dr. Barnes, with us as we delve, and we're going to go right on in. And I'll turn it back over to Dr. Walker to get us started.
Dr. Barnes, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you. It is certainly my pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Wonderful. Well, you know, when we got started with LeadHerSpace, we had a very engaging conversation about a month ago about women in leadership. And so I want to start the conversation tonight about you sharing your own experiences as a woman in a major leadership role. So if you could just tell our audience a little bit more about your journey and your experience.
Oh, I certainly can. You know, I began this journey, I'd say, in earnest in around 2008. And at that time, I found myself in the C-suite. I had the position, I had the title, and I realized, looking up literally around the table, that I was the only woman at the table. And I knew that there were other women who were qualified to be there. And I knew that, you know, there was room for more. And I ended up having a conversation with one of the leaders, or a woman that I deemed a leader, who reported to me. And we were actually completing her evaluation. And I talked about how I saw the leader in her and how I saw her progressing. And she said, you know, wow, no one has ever said that to me. Now, she had been at this organization, I don't know, at this point, probably 10, 15 years. And at all of that time had never recognized herself as a leader. And it was kind of those two events that made me realize that, you know, since I was there, literally at the table, literally in the C-suites, that, you know, I had an obligation and really a passion to get more women at the table. So I began, you know, doing leadership research myself, trying to become a better leader, and ended up developing a leadership development program, and went to my CEO and asked that, you know, he support this effort, and basically brought to his attention that there were not women actively being engaged in the leadership pipeline. And we had a program, a graduate and management program as it was deemed, but nothing ever really, I won't say nothing ever really came of that. That program did not produce or directly produce the next generation of leaders. And fortunately, he was, you know, I brought the data. I didn't come, you know, from an anecdotal perspective. You know, I'm an attorney by trade, so I brought the evidence. And fortunately, I was able to institute that program and did that for about 5 years. And we had about 100 women, mostly women, to go through that program, and many VPs and other promotions, other leadership positions within the organization, you know, came out of that. But that's what really got me committed to helping other women get in the C-suite.
Wow.
It's interesting. It's interesting that you talked about you had your evidence. I love that, where you say you had your evidence. And that kind of leads me to, you know, how do women make those demands in the work setting and not be perceived as problematic? You bring your evidence. I love that. If you can just help us there a little bit more. How do you do that as a woman? And so that you're not seen as, oh, you're a problem, or the angry woman bringing these issues.
Right. And this is a common challenge that often women have is, you know, we want to approach things from the perspective of what we deserve. And truly we do deserve it. But that's anecdotal. And there are lots of people who, quote, deserve promotions or deserve to be recognized as leaders. And it's important for us as women in particular to not be modest as it relates to why we deserve it. And, you know, I don't deserve a raise because I need more money. I don't deserve a raise because I'm a hard worker and a team player. I deserve a raise because there is a monetary connection between what I bring to the table and the bottom line of the company, whether it's nonprofit or for-profit. And we've got to learn how to tie those things. And oftentimes, you know, women tend to be modest to a fault, where we are, because there is this common misconception that an ambitious woman is a bad thing. You know, we've had that whole conversation in the media recently with the nomination of Kamala Harris as VP. You know, there was a lot of concern around her being ambitious, whereas that is not necessarily the case for men. But we've got to learn to document our ambition. What are the projects that we're working on? What are the financial benefits of what we're doing? And come with the evidence. Because when you approach things from an anecdotal perspective, it's easier for it to be dismissed as, you know, oh, you know, she's a problem, or she's being emotional, or, you know, she's a, you know, a troublemaker. But when you come with the evidence and you can connect your request, or you can connect the desire to have more women in or the impact rather of having more women in the leadership pipeline or having them at the table, then it is more difficult for it to be dismissed.
I'm going to let Dr. Walker go, but I'm telling you, that's a shout moment right there for me. I'm telling you the evidence. So friends, as you all are hearing this, you have evidence as to the reason why you deserve more money, not simply because there's money out there. You deserve it. You work for it. She said evidence. So take the evidence and claim it. Dr. Walker and I talk from time to time. And, you know, it's interesting. I hope she doesn't mind me kind of sharing this. But one of the things that she has even said in our conversations is that the reason why she's gone back to get these degrees, or the reason why she's done so much preparation or work, is so that she can have the evidence to continue to ask for and demand certain things. And because she's put in her work, she's put in her time, she's put in the effort. And because of that, she has the evidence to say, yes, I need and I want and I will get more. So thank you, Dr. Walker.
Exactly. You have to know your worth.
Yes.
So, I mean, it's fair, and we have to have equitable pay, equitable job positions. And so it's necessary not only to have the evidence, but also to have the influence. And I think that's important, to be at the right tables and to gauge the sphere of influence that you need to be connected with to make those power moves, if you will. And so I want to talk a little bit about balanced leadership and what that should look like. Like, how do you envision those seats at the table? Like, what would a more balanced leadership team look like? Mm-hmm. How can equity be built on a leadership team? Not just one woman at the table to meet a quota, but what does equity really look like?
Right. And, you know, that's a very great question to ask in terms of really being able to ensure that when you come to the table, it has the desired impact. And one of the ways to ensure that is that when you get at the table that you use your voice appropriately and you're not just silent, because sometimes we're just so happy to be at the table that, we kind of like, I'm just going to sit here. I'm not going to cause any trouble. I'm going to be quiet. I'm going to just make sure I can stay at the table. But you really have to learn how you can make the biggest impact and be strategic about doing that, and build alliances, because having more women at the table isn't just to have another pretty face. It's not just for the sake of, like you say, filling a quota. Women bring a certain perspective that men don't, and vice versa. And when you have any dominance of a perspective, that particularly where it doesn't reflect the market, whatever the industry is that you're serving, when you don't reflect the market, when your thought leadership does not reflect your market diversity, then you're not going to be as effective as when you have that thought leadership diversity at the table that can raise the question of, are we considering this, or we should do this, or we shouldn't do that. And so that's the thing that I would say, in being able to ensure that diversity and equity. One, you have to realize you have a voice. Two, you have to decide that you're going to use it. And three, you have to be strategic about how you use that voice. And I would add a fourth thing is that you build alliances with those who are already there.
That's good. That's good. That's really helpful, because I know we talk a lot about diversity and inclusion, but diversity gets you to the table. But I need to make sure that I'm included, like my voice matters and it counts, and I'm an agent of change at the table and not just filling a space.
Right. And it's all about, again, being strategic. That's one of the things that, I had to learn in many ways the hard way. And I know that I was more effective when I began to not just lead from the heart and lead from passion, and all of those things are important. But when I began to be strategic and really think about, what is the desired outcome? Because, like, for example, when I went to my CEO many years ago to develop that leadership program, it wasn't just because this was my pet project and I thought it would be cool. I looked at the desired outcome of being able to have a systematic way of getting women into the leadership pipeline. And the desired outcome was to have our leadership reflect the population of employees, because that particular company, for example, had, I think it was 60% women, 40% men, yet the leadership was 90% men, 10% women, or maybe 80-20. But it wasn't even reflective of the population. So again, thinking about things in a strategic way, and kind of also knowing how and when to apply the passion, because you need the passion and you need to be assertive. And we have to recognize that in many respects, when women are assertive, it's not well received. We get tagged as being aggressive, and it's not recognized as a positive leadership trait. So again, we have to be strategic in how we do it and ensure that we're building those relationships and alliances that get the rest of our colleagues on board.
Wow, some good stuff. Really, really good stuff. So, I want to kind of segue into this entrepreneurial spirit. You're the CEO of C-Suite Network Women Leadership. And so I'd like for you to kind of talk about that and some of the challenges that you've seen over the years building this, but opportunities as well, in being an entrepreneur.
Okay, wonderful. And, C-Suite Women's Network is, again, even the name is very strategic, because, this began, or my journey began with literally wanting to get women into the C-suite of companies. But, not all women are going to work in corporations. There are women who desire to be entrepreneurs. There are women who desire to be leaders in the community. And one of the things that I realized, early on, is the respect and responsibility that a CEO has in a company. And I thought about how each woman needs that respect and needs to fully embrace that responsibility as the CEO of her own life. And C-Suite Women's Network was born out of this desire to help women to be the CEOs of their lives and be able to make those decisions, build those teams, and execute on their plans. Because a lot of times we'll get caught up in the dream part, but not the execution. And the network aspect really recognizes that you don't do it by yourself. It really requires alliances. And you'll hear me talk about alliances and networking and networthing all the time, because this is about, in order to be effective, once you get at the table, you've got to have alliances, not only with those around the table, but with that pipeline that's coming, and then others who are external to whatever that situation is. And so C-Suite Women's Network is really focused on empowering and equipping women to make powerful decisions to create the life they desire and deserve. Because we can have it all, but it doesn't happen unless we are strategic about it. There's certain things that'll fall into our laps, but especially where we desire to have families and where we desire to be balanced. And I like to use the word equilibrium more so than balance, where we desire to be effective in all quadrants of our life. It requires this strategy. And so, it focuses on really helping women to be what I like to say is mindful and deliberate about creating the life they desire and deserve. And with that is a commitment to not just take whatever you get, but to recognize that you get what you negotiate, and you get what you plan, and mostly you get what you execute on.
Oh, that's good. I love that about being deliberate and strategic. And so I'm just thinking about the people who may aspire to be, a C-suite level someday, but maybe encountering challenges. They're doing the networking, they're getting the credentials. Can we talk a little bit about the challenges and things you had to overcome to get to this level?
Right. And I think, again, it goes back to developing those powerful relationships, because, most of us don't come from a situation where we automatically have these networks set up. Many of us are, first generation C-suite workers, or we didn't come from a family where we could just call up our aunt or our mom and say, hey, how did you get into the C-suite, right? Many times it's us being the pioneer in this respect. And I developed great relationships early on with men and women. And we've got to be unafraid to ask for assistance and to be deliberate in creating those relationships. And a lot of times it's going to be people who don't look like us. And this is not about hanging out. I never had friendships necessarily with my mentors. We didn't hang out after work. But again, they were people who I could add value to by one, doing great work, doing great service, and showing that if they were champions for me, that I could deliver. But it was, again, goes back to being deliberate about creating those relationships. And I think that every woman ought to have what I call, certain C notes. And C notes just denotes the ability to increase your wealth by building these relationships. You need to have someone who is your cheerleader, someone who's going to pump you up, be your motivator. You need to have someone who's your counselor, that person who you can go to for advice. You need to have a coach, someone who's going to teach you a skill and hold you accountable to yourself. You need to learn how to become connected with others. So you need a connector. And these are those people who connect you to other opportunities and other relationships. And you need to have a champion. These are the people who are going to advocate for you in the room when you're not there. So early on, I recognized that I had to build relationships. I couldn't just wait on opportunities to come to me. I had to go out and get them. But again, I had to be mindful, deliberate, and strategic about doing so.
You are absolutely confirming a lot of what we talked about on our last chat. I mean, it's amazing, this whole notion of building relationships, champions, supporters, coaching. And I like for you to talk about that just a little bit more, because there are people who might be introvert. They have that entrepreneurial spirit, but they are not really extroverted. They don't know how to start or how to really build those relationships and connections. And as you said, you don't have to go out with them. You don't have to be friends with them, but there's a relationship that you have to build. What does that look like? How does one start to build the relationship when they're building their brand or building what they want the world to see them or know them as?
Yeah. And it's funny you talk about introverts, because actually I'm an introvert. and a lot of people find it very difficult to believe, but that's at the heart of who I am. I'm an introvert. But I recognize that if I desire to be successful, I was going to have to talk to people. I'm going to have to get out there, and I could not just stay in my shell. And I'll just share really briefly the very first networking event I went to. I was I think I was a senior, I was about to go into my first year of law school, and I was in this program called SEO, Sponsors for Educational Opportunity, where rising first year law students were placed in New York law firms. So here I was, young girl from Greenville, Mississippi, in the Big Apple, New York, for the first time, and we had this networking reception. And so I had to talk to other partners or partners in the law firm, these New York lawyers, none of them looked like me. And I literally remember the physical reaction. I had the back of my head burned. I was sweating, down the back of my neck, just this horrible physical reaction. And I pushed myself through it and managed to talk to people. But after that event, I recognized, wow, you know what? If I'm going to be successful as a young lawyer, I've got to, at that point, I wasn't even a lawyer, just a young law student. I've got to learn how to talk to people and not be so physically, having to be such a physically negative reaction. And so that's one of the things that, when you are committed to being successful and when you're committed to getting your seat at the table, you got to push yourself beyond your comfort zone, because you're going to get the same thing you've always had if you stay in your comfort zone. It's crazy. You've heard the definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. And so when you decide that you want your seat at the table, introvert or extrovert, you've got to commit to being able to build those relationships. So, I still have to pump myself up and psych myself up to go and engage. And it's genuine because I have a genuine desire to connect, but it's a skill set that I've learned. And it's a skill set that I constantly work on becoming better at. So, even if you are an introvert, you've got to talk to people. So you've got to figure out a way to come out of your shell. And, and I like to think about it, I'm a big Beyonce fan, and, there's Beyonce and then there's Sasha Fierce. And that Sasha Fierce is her stage personality. That's who she becomes when she's ready to entertain. So sometimes you've got to figure out what's your Sasha Fierce. How are you going to show up in order to be able to connect?
That's really good. You know what? I'm a Beyonce fan as well. So, we're going to tap into some Sasha Fierce on tonight as we share with our viewing audience. But I want to talk a little bit more about, as you mentioned, being an introvert, but coming out of your shell to create opportunities for yourself. How do you brand? How have you created a brand for your business?
Mm-hmm. Yes. And again, that's something that you have to be very deliberate about. So I'm very thoughtful because I'm a strategist by nature. When I look back over, even when I was a young child, I've always been committed to a strategy. And so, one of the things that we have to commit to is being strategic about how we show up. And so I have decided for myself, what my brand is in terms of my leadership brand, how I lead, my communication brand, what will people expect when they hear me, when they see me, as well as how I want my business to show up. When I talk about C-Suite Women's Network, there's a certain, you know, feature about it that people have become to expect, and I have been very deliberate. So even thinking about how I show up on social media, there is nothing that I post or that comes up on even my personal page. My personal page is intended to show people who I am as a way of getting to know me. But even still, I don't put all my thoughts out there. I don't put everything out there. Very mindful and deliberate. And so, I've always thought about, how I want to be perceived as a leader in particular. And I started this exercise around 2009. And at the time, I desired to be a CEO and had engaged like a headhunter to assist me with that process. And I sent them over my resume. And the first thing that they talked about was that my resume, for example, screamed lawyer. All they talked about was legal experience, legal education. Yet I wanted to be seen in the marketplace for my executive skills that I did have. And so having that conversation helped me to literally think about, how do I want people to perceive me as a leader? And I wrote down like the 5 attributes that, whether I was practicing law, being an executive in a company, whether I was an entrepreneur or a community leader, what are the 5 things, for example, that I felt were my strongest attributes and what people perceived in me? And so I began to think about those 5 things and to make sure that every time was consistent. So it's, again, being strategic, being deliberate, and really thinking about, how do you want people to perceive you? Writing it down. Writing gives things significance. And when you do that, it helps you be accountable to your own brand.
Wow. Absolutely phenomenal. Being accountable to your brand, strategic, having strategy, making sure that how people see you is representing your brand, because you are your brand. So people need to see you through Facebook, through LinkedIn, through Twitter and Instagram. They need to see the brand that you want to create. So minimizing a lot of the unnecessaries, as we call it. Wow, absolutely wonderful. So, when women, again, back to this whole thing about equality, when women are in the workplace, talk to us. You're a corporate attorney. You've been an attorney for years, and you've seen things happen. You've seen people come and go. What are some legal rights that we as women have and we should be aware of in the workplace? We hear about FMLA, fair compensation, but if you can talk to us as we think about these roles and how we continue to grow, what types of rights do we have in the workplace?
Right, and that's a very important point for us to recognize and to be aware of our rights so that we can be our own advocates. And one of the things that we should always do is read our HR manual. There are, we always get that during orientation, and it's something that's online. We don't get physical copies anymore, but make sure that we know, what does HR say our rights are, right? And make sure that we understand the policies and procedures, make sure we understand how we need to document things. Because, I started out talking about evidence. And when we are faced with sexual discrimination, gender discrimination, and other kinds of discrimination, or when our rights are being violated, again, nobody is going to be able to do anything if it's just anecdotal. You've got to know what evidence is needed, and you've got to be able to produce it. And, you mentioned like FMLA and, how that preserves certain rights when you have to take care of family members. The rights that are probably the most at risk are those that are subtle and somewhat subjective and less or more difficult sometimes to have direct evidence tied to them. You know, looking at, you know, how you are treated compared to your male peers, being able to recognize discrimination when you see it, and understanding, for example, you know, how projects are assigned, how are promotions done, how are opportunities for networking created. I know I worked with an executive many years ago who had a rule, for example, that he never was alone in a room with a woman, and never took a woman out, or never had lunch with any of the women employees, or never was in a situation. That was his rule. Just a never, I'm never going to be alone with a woman. Now, it was something that was ostensibly driven by the decision he and his wife had about avoiding the appearance of impropriety. But what it did was that it created a bias. And biases are the more difficult things to prove because, again, they can be more subjective. But he created a bias, meaning who did he mentor? Other men. Who did he spend extra time with for purposes of grooming and making sure that they had instruction and positioning them for promotion? Other men. And so again, it's looking, it's being observant and understanding the differences. So if you don't know what a bias is, and when a bias becomes discriminatory, then you may not be as good at being able to document it. But when you know that, you know, again, looking at statistics, we may not be mathematicians. I'm not a mathematician, but I know how to show how the numbers are not adding up. And so, like, for example, when I went to my CEO many years ago to start that leadership program, I took the numbers and I showed him the discriminatory effect of the hiring practices. Because at the bottom line, that's what he needed to overcome and needed to recognize as the leader of that organization. So when I was able to show, for example, you got 60% women in this organization, and how is it that none of them are able to make it up the ranks to become leaders? Helped me to understand that disconnect. And of course, he didn't really have an answer for it. And so the program that I wanted to put in place provided a gap, a way to fill that gap. So again, understanding the numbers, paying attention to how you are treated compared to your male peers, and understanding when it's just a difference and when that difference has a legal impact. And so that's something that I would say that, we all need to become familiar with. What's a bias? How does a bias become discriminatory? What do our HR policies say as it relates to reporting things, sexual harassment? Because a lot of times there are things that are where we push, where envelopes are pushed, where, it's considered funny to the person who's saying it, but it's offensive. And our level of offense is going to differ. But the rule is, if it's offensive, if it creates this hostile environment, then it's something that is actionable. But you need to go to HR. Because when you ignore these things and you don't follow your company's procedures, then that works against you.
Oh.
Well, that's great information, Dr. Barnes. I love how you always take us back to the numbers, because I think far too often in organizations, whether it's a major corporation or it's an higher education institution, we don't always have data-driven decisions. And so it's important to have the numbers, to have the data, to have all of those factors in place before we make decisions about a particular thing. And so that's going to be helpful tonight with those who are listening and viewing on tonight. We've talked about a number of things. We've talked about mentorship, which I wanted you to stay right there for a little while, because that mentorship piece is essential on getting to the place where we break the glass ceiling, where we are at the C-suite as women, and we need mentorship. And you said something very important when you said you don't hang out with your mentors. You don't necessarily have to if that opportunity presents itself, yes, but we can't get upset if we want relationship with people, if they're not our friends. Mentors are there to pour into us for us to gain information from. So that was so great. I wish you could have stayed there a little bit longer. But you shared some great information. But before we leave on this evening, I would love for you to share some wisdom nuggets with everyone. Share about, things that have helped you along the way. And before you leave us tonight, please make sure to share how people can get in contact with you.
Oh, absolutely. I would say, one of the biggest revelations that I've had, and it has evolved over the years, is that I don't have to decide, none of us have to decide between either or. We can decide on the and it's a philosophy I call living life in the and many times socially we are conditioned to think that it's either or. And you heard me early on talk about how you can have it all, right? And all looks different for every different woman, and all changes in our different seasons as to what we think that means. But you can have everything you desire in life, or you have a greater chance for achieving that when you first accept that you don't have to choose between either or. You don't have to be a mother or a career woman. You don't have to be a wife or a career woman. You don't have to do any of these things, or you don't have to put yourself in a bucket and that's just where you are. You can live your life in the and when you decide that and you become committed to achieving that and whatever that is, you position yourself for greater success. And one of the best analogies I've had or learned from how we need to begin looking at our career paths, because I have a very non-traditional career path. I've done all kinds of different things, and especially at this stage in my life, it doesn't look like it doesn't look like at all what I thought it would when I started out, and it doesn't look like what society may think that my career path should be. But one of the best things that we need to think about as it relates to our career paths is to think of our careers more like jungle gyms and not like ladders. Because we put ourselves in these boxes when we think it's a ladder. You can only go up, and it's not a good thing if you go down. Because in this day and age, the marketplace is not a hierarchy anymore. It's very dynamic. And particularly as we are emerging from, and I'm going to put it in that perspective because I believe we will get there, emerging from COVID-19 and the impact it has on our workplaces. It has really been a great way to show how flexible we can be in our careers, because for many years, especially for women who desire to have flexible work schedules, we were told can't be done, you have to be in the office. COVID-19 has blown that to smithereens. That's a good thing. But getting back to the point of, being dynamic in the marketplace, we have to learn to look at our careers like jungle gyms. Jungle gym, you can go up, you can go down, you can go to the left, you can go to the right, you go all the way around. It gives you all of these different options. And we don't need to subscribe to this thought that once you're on this path, the only way you can go is in these stair-step directions. Because in order to get the experience you need, in order to make the connections you need to make, you may need to go down, so to speak. You may need to take a position that's lower than where you are, but it's a different skill set and it has a different trajectory. You may decide to do something lateral. You may go up and so my point is giving yourself the flexibility to allow your career to evolve in response to really evolve ahead of what the marketplace demands. So that would be the biggest nugget that I would want women listening and watching to take away is, one, commit to living your life in the and. You don't have to choose between either or. With the right plan, strategy, and commitment, you can truly have it all, whatever that means for you. And then the kind of subset of that is to ensure that you don't commit so narrowly to any one path that you miss out on other opportunities because it's outside your comfort zone, or it's going in the quote wrong direction. I truly don't believe there are any wrong directions. Everything happens as it should.
Well, this is, and I know that Dr. Walker said that was our wrap up, but I just, if you can give 2 minutes to somebody who, I just think that somebody is contemplating starting over, starting new, starting fresh,
Yes.
changing directions. If you could just close us out with, hey, somebody want to start new, they want to start completely different, total different direction, start new, something, you know, whatever is transpired in their lives, and they're really thinking about rebuilding. If you could just close us out with that.
Sure. And, you know, actually, I could be a case study for that. As I mentioned, I have a non-traditional career path. And in 2014, I decided I didn't want to practice law anymore. I had been in health law for, at that point, I think 16 years, and working for this one health system, and really felt it was a dead end in terms of progression. There was no other position above me other than the CEO. And I really didn't desire to be a CEO of a health system. I wasn't having fun anymore doing compliance. Compliance is very, you know, straight and narrow. I'm really, you can look at me and tell I'm not the straight and narrow type. And, you know, but I had this Harvard Law degree. I had this C-suite position. I had all of these things that, you know, suggested, again, I needed to continue to go in this different direction. And I just decided that I wanted to start all over again. And so that's when I went back to school and got my PhD, because I wanted to learn more about leadership development and to develop a true discipline in that respect. And then I had some things happen in life that forced additional changes on me. And I literally have started all over again. And it was scary, but it has been beautiful. In the end, it has been beautiful. So the thing I would just like to say is, don't be afraid to start over. There certainly are risks. You have to calculate the risks. It's not an easy road. You know, there are some parts of my life that I certainly wish I could have just skipped. I'm like, you know, I really didn't need all of that. But I also believe in this concept called disruptive elevation. Mm-hmm. And by that, I mean, you know, life doesn't always go as planned, but it always goes exactly as it should. And so we have to learn, and it's hard to do when you are used to being in control, but you have to kind of let loose this notion that you are in control of everything and learn to evolve with the opportunities as they are presented. So don't be afraid to start over. There's no, you know, you can look through history and see women who have done great things after the age of 40. I am on my golden horizon. I'll be 50 years old in 2 years. And you know, I used to always dread telling my age, and I'd lie talking about I was 25. I was 25 about 10 years. But I embrace that because this is truly a beautiful era. And so that you're not too old. If you look at Vera Wang, one of my favorite entrepreneurs, she started her business in her 40s. You know, there are so many examples of women, in particular men too, you know, who have started big businesses in their 40s, 50s, and even beyond. I was at an entrepreneur conference, I think 3 years ago, with a woman who was 60 something and decided that she wanted to start a business. So don't let society tell you it's too late, and don't tell yourself, don't convince yourself that it's too late. And when you are presented with an opportunity, go for it.
Well, Dr. Barnes, this has been a great conversation. Before you leave, please share with our viewing audience how they can get connected to you. Share your social media handles and your website information, please.
Sure. Yeah. So I make it pretty easy. You can go. You can find me on social media handles. Dr. Stephanie D. Barnes. My Instagram is at Dr. Stephanie D. Barnes. On Facebook, you got to put the D in there, though. Stephanie D. Barnes. But if you search for me that way, you'll be able to find me. And of course, my website is www.drstephaniedbarnes.com. So I make it easy. It's me. It's my name.
That's the branding right there. All across avenues, Dr. Stephanie D. Barnes.
Yes.
Dr. Stephanie D. Barnes. And I want to shout out one of your sorors. She actually tagged you in a post, Yvonne Austin. She tagged you in a post, in one of the posts that I put out there. So Yvonne, if you're on, shout out to you. Thank you for joining us. So this has been a wonderful night. Friends, thank you all so much for sharing with LeadHerSpace. Thank you, Dr. Stephanie Barnes. Thank you, Dr. Walker, LaShante Walker, for all of the work that you all continue to do in leading women. We're so grateful. We're honored to have you all on tonight. And so we're going to say good night until the next time. We hope that you'll follow us, continue to share with us. Follow Dr. Barnes, get those nuggets every week. She has a coffee, C-suite talk, chat. So you'll hear from her. If you follow her on LinkedIn, you'll certainly get those weekly coffee breaks with her. So good night, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us. And we'll see you on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Take care.
If you have not joined LeadHerSpace, please go to our LeadHerSpace page and join today. Thank you. Have a good night.
Good night.